Yes.
So it is, the reason we did this live on YouTube is so that people could just check in, and just sort of watch what fits for them, what doesn't. But they can also chat. So anyone who's out there, just being cautious of whatever you put out there is public. So putting that in your hands. But I will be watching. Kim cannot see the live feed. So as my job is to moderate this presentation, so I will watch the chats as they come up and then try and introduce those into the presentation as Kim's going. Keeping in mind there is a 15-second lag. So you can ask a question and then there would be 15 seconds before the question actually comes up on YouTube. So there might be a little bit of lag as we're trying to attend to the comments that come up. So sorry.
No, I'm glad you did that. And actually, I'm going to step back as well and introduce myself.
Right. Just a second. So everyone knows we're a little bit flustered because we had some technical issues and we just barely got things working right at the last minute. But 5 minutes before that, it did not seem like it was going to work out. So
that's great.
Go ahead.
So we didn't take a minute to actually land, and so this is us landing now, right? So I'm Kim Porchuk with FCSS. I'm a family support worker, and part of what I do is parent education and support parents in their important role of parenting. So today, the presentation that I would like to talk about is temperament on FCSS Live. And did you want to introduce yourself, Brian?
I'm Brian Bullock. I'm a counselor with FCSS, and what I'm doing here is just moderating, and again, just helping out with chats and whatever else Kim needs as we go through the presentation.
Awesome. So yeah, so if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to write it into the chat. And Brian will. I can't see the chat, but I can see Brian, so he'll wave and let me know if there's any questions or comments. So as I said, with the temperaments, it can really help to explain kind of how two kids coming up being raised in the same environment can be two totally different personalities. And it can also help us to understand our child better and understand why they do the things that they do. Realize maybe they're not just pushing our buttons. Maybe this is really something in the way that they are uniquely wired, I guess, because the temperament traits we're actually born with, as you'll see as we go along. So when a baby is born, oftentimes we'll ask, or if we see parents downtown, somebody that we know that's had a baby, one of the questions that we'll ask them is, how are they sleeping? Are they easy, or a good baby? Those kind of things. What we're trying to figure out is what their temperament is, right? Have you ever been asked those questions, Brian, when your little babies were little? Did people ask you?
I was watching this. What was the question?
Oh, sorry, you're watching the chats. When you had your baby and you're pushing them in a stroller and you see somebody that you know, what are some of the questions that they ask you? Besides what did you name them? How much did they weigh? When were they born? What are some of the questions that you're asked as a parent, or do you ask other people?
Yeah, sleep was the number one. How do they sleep?
How are they sleeping? Yes. And some people will even say, are they a good baby?
Right.
Right? What they're referring to is their temperament. Are they, do they sleep through the night? Do they cry? How much are they crying? All of those things are relating to temperament. So as I was beginning to say earlier, Dr. Thomas and Chess, two doctors, did a study in 32-year longitudinal study, and they looked at, or they found that there were 9 temperament traits that we are each born with. And these temperament traits can be thought of as on a scale or a continuum between low, medium, and high. So I thought it would be nice if we could look at some of the individual temperaments, and then I think we're going to focus on the later ones, the sensitivity and intensity a little bit more, because those are typically the temperament traits that parents often will ask about, and like I said, are asking about when your baby is even first born. Are they an easy baby, or do they sleep, or do they cry a lot? So the first temperament trait that I wanted to talk about is regularity and rhythmicity. So this is basically the regular rhythm, if they have one, of eating, sleeping, toileting, that kind of a thing. It's the sort of that internal clock. Are they fairly regular or not? So if they're not regular and it's kind of all over the place, and you never know when they're going to, want to eat or sleep, then they might be low on the continuum of regularity or rhythmicity. Or they could be high if they are doing it at the same time every day. That means they're higher. And this can have a lot of impact on their sleep, actually, because if they're babies who fall low in regularity or rhythmicity, that they can really have difficulty falling asleep and staying asleep. So the temperament really can affect us in many different ways. The next one that I want to talk about is initial reactions. So this is sort of another word for this would be the approach or withdrawal. So as a baby or as a young child, or even as an adult, what is when somebody approaches your child, do they when there's something new, I guess, maybe not even approach, but when there's something new, how do they approach it with, like just kind of are they all in, or are they kind of reserved and hold back? So this approach withdrawal, I guess, is what explains that. Some people might call this shy, I guess, or reserved. How are they? Do they stand back and observe, or do they just jump in with both feet? The activity level, how active are they? Well, that says it all right there. They can either be low, medium, or high, or somewhere in between, right? Some kids are just happy to sit and content to just sit and play, where others are constantly going and climbing on stuff and getting into things. Persistence. So this is how long a child stays with a task. Can you read the little words
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, good. How long a child might stay with the task if they're trying to as a baby, pick something up or open something, how long do they stay with that? How persistent are they? And as I said, these are traits that we're born with that follow us throughout our lives. So if you're a fairly persistent baby, then you're probably going to grow to be a fairly persistent child and adult. Distractibility is the next one. How distractible are they? So this is where how long can they stick with the task or get distracted by other things that are happening around them. The mood or disposition. So basically, do they have a sunny disposition or a more serious disposition? I remember one little guy. I just remember thinking he's just such a serious little baby. He just always had this serious look on his face, I remember even saying that he's just such a serious little guy, and he is. That's his disposition. He's just very serious about things. Adaptability. How do they adapt to changes in their schedule? How flexible can they be? How do they cope with surprises? Do they cope quite well with surprises or not at all? And sensitivity and intensity, I saved those two for last because those are kind of my favorite to talk about. And I thought even that I would even go into those on a separate slide to take a closer look at those. So sensitivity is the threshold to stimulus around them. So how sensitive are they to the world around them? And intensity goes hand in hand with that. So then if they're higher on the sensitivity, then their intensity will very likely be high too, because if you feel something stronger, your reaction naturally is also stronger. So that's the energy level of response. So taking a closer look at sensitivity, this slide takes a closer look at sensitivity. I've also added the words beside low, the answer. When you're asking yourself these questions and thinking about these questions, you can also think of it as no, so, or yes. So low, medium, or high. So in thinking about sensitivity, does your child have a strong reaction to painful situations like falling off a bike or getting a splinter? So some kids, aren't really all that saved by that. They're not really all that affected by falling off their bike or getting a sliver. And other kids, it's like the end of the world because they've got a sliver, right? So this actually makes me think of my daughter when she was really quite little. She was fairly high in intensity and in sensitivity, and she'd broken her arm, but I didn't realize that that's what happened. And she screamed bloody murder, and I didn't come running because she had quite an intense reaction to most things in life, and so it wasn't all that out of the ordinary, because when kids who are higher intensity, especially babies, will cry louder, cry longer, and cry more often. And as a baby who was higher in intensity, that was her response. So when this blood curdling scream came out, I didn't really think much of it until I realized that she broke her arm. And it had to be stacked and placed and everything. And to this day, I think about that and think, oh man, next time I'll move quicker. But anyways, she had a strong reaction, but in that case there was a broken bone. But the reaction to the broken bone and the reaction to a sliver can be almost similar if kids have intense reactions.
Yeah, and I can relate to that if I can cut in there.
Yes, absolutely.
Is our youngest son, you pretty much know what's going on based on how intense the cry is. So you can be a ways away and okay, that's serious. That's not. Our daughter's the same way as your daughter, where it's maximum regardless. So you got to be on the scene to assess the damage.
You got to come running every time. And that can be exhausting for parents. But it's exhausting for them too. We have to understand that this is how they're truly feeling, right? So thanks for sharing that, Brian. And I think it's more common than we think, right? So the next question is, are your children extremely sensitive to certain fabrics or the way certain clothing feels? I, to this day, will not sleep in satin sheets because they just are I find them they catch on every little thing if my skin is dry. I just don't like the feel. You can guess where I am on the scale, maybe a little bit more on the intense and sensitive side. So certain tags, there's a shirt that I have that I tried cutting the tag out of it, and that even made it worse. And so now it pokes me, so there's definite fabrics that are more difficult to wear for kids who are a little bit more, and people in general, higher in sensitivity. Are your children able to distinguish flavors and differences in brands of food? This one, when we did this presentation the last time, I was sharing that I had just purchased a new brand of sour cream, and my husband was just beside himself because he's like, what made you think to get this, this sour cream? And I thought, well, I only got it because it's dairy free. And he said, I love it. You need to get this from here on in. And I'm like, I could not tell the difference, but he could. He's like a connoisseur of brands. He can, you cannot skimp on certain brands. It's got to be Heinz ketchup as well. And that's the cool thing about temperaments too. If you're able to understand not just your kids' temperaments, but your own temperaments and your significant other's temperaments and your friend's temperament, it really can help you understand the dynamics in the relationship as well. So it's nice to be able to kind of go through this with anybody that you have a relationship with and kind of figure out where they are on the scale of temperaments. Do your children have strong reaction to smells and odors? Um, you know, there are some foods that, well, we don't, my husband does not like it when I have tuna in the house. He just, that is a strong smell, and he just has a really adverse reaction to that. It's not his favorite at all. Do bright lights bother your children? So those kind of things are, some people are really highly aware. Babies who are higher in sensitivity, um, and if they're, so if they're higher in sensitivity and lower in rhythmicity, they can have a lot of trouble sleeping, for instance, because things like lights, temperature, sounds, all of those things can wake them up, and they can have a lot more trouble falling asleep and staying asleep, especially if they're also low in regularity or rhythmicity, if they don't have a sort of that internal clock. That can be really hard for babies to be able to fall asleep and stay asleep. And then as a result, be hard for the parent who's not getting a whole heck of a lot of sleep too. So it's, when it comes to temperaments, oh, let's talk about this one actually first. So which side of the scale, after asking yourself those questions, which side of the scale does your child fall on? Because if it's to the right of the scale, you may have a child who's more sensory sensitive. So they feel certain senses very strongly, touch, taste, sound, those kind of things. And then their reactions to that stimuli can seem out of proportion or more intense. And this is where I say that intensity and sensitivity go hand in hand, because if you have a child who's more sensitive to things, then things they feel more strongly, then the reaction is then more intense of a reaction. If they fall more on the left hand of the scale, where um, the emoji there is laying in the flowers and not really a care in the world, they may be less sensory sensitive, and they tend to react less to stimuli in their environment. They're less critical of food, sight, sound, smell. Things don't really seem to, they really don't have, they don't complain about a lot because things don't really bother them. Where the child who is more sensory sensitive have way more things that are sort of assaulting their senses and more of a reason to have a reaction.
So Kim, just as a question, is maybe just seeing if some comments come up, just a thought that's coming to my mind, because I get from what you're saying is this is just kind of who a person is. Mm-hmm. Just looking at those two Bitmojis and thinking, like, you think at times one seems more, it's almost like, I wonder if sensitivity comes with a negative connotation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because that actually is the case. Oftentimes, I mean, I know that in my, growing up, being a little bit more on the sensitive side, that was sort of the thing that I thought was my biggest weakness, was that I was too sensitive. I was told that you're too sensitive, you're too, too loud, too intense. And those are always things that I thought were my biggest weaknesses. But what I like to do, and I think it's important that we all do, is embrace that and realize that those things that we think are our biggest weaknesses can actually be our biggest strength. Mm-hmm. If we are able to understand them, and especially with our children, understand those in our children and nurture them, and then help our children to understand that within themselves, and to see how that there's two sides to it. Yeah, there's times when we can be, I suppose, when there's times when we're supposed to be sitting and listening and paying attention rather than outgoing, but and it's for us as parents to help our children learn how to handle those temperaments, I guess, or how to help us to react to things in our life. If that makes any sense.
Totally. Like it could, I like what you said there, where it can be perceived as a weakness. This is
Yeah,
who the person is. And if realized and accepted, that can be also your biggest strength.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Nice. Thanks.
Yeah. So, um, so what do we do if our child is uh, falling on the right hand side of that scale? So more sensory sensitive. What can we do? How can we help them? And there's lots and lots of things we can do that to help our child with that. But I love this slide because you, this is what I got from Brene Brown is empathy, respond with empathy. And this is very general. There's a lot more specific things that we could help. If this is the case and you're wanting to find some more support, then this is something that we could do as a family support workers. We could work with you. You could either join some of our parent education classes, or you could come to us for individual sessions and we could help work with you through that. But in general, I think this slide really explains uh, one of the things that what we can do in responding with empathy, which is taking the perspective taking, putting yourself in their shoes, realizing this is real for them and this is how this feels. They're not just making this up and they're not just pushing our buttons. To believe them that this really does feel itchy. This really is hard for me to sleep. It really is too hot, too cold, too loud, all of those things. And also to be non-judgmental, avoid name calling. And I think, Brian, this is where the labels happen, is we get called picky. We get called, oftentimes sensitive kids are very picky eaters, and we get labeled picky eaters. And is it really picky, or is it just connoisseur?
Mhm.
It really does feel lumpy and bumpy. To this day, I can't eat tapioca. I just can't do it. Um, Being labeled a complainer, too sensitive, too loud, too intense, all of those things. So being non-judgmental and avoiding name calling, understanding the feelings. You can convey that by saying, my emotions get away on me sometimes too. And conveying that you understand. That is the next one. Conveying that you understand. I've been there. I remember how that feels. It doesn't feel good. And then holding space and being mindful. It's okay to feel this way. So responding with empathy is probably, this just in a nutshell covers sort of everything.
Mhm.
And then my last slide is just this picture of me that I found as I was doing this presentation. I had this Bitmoji of this intense reaction, which really is me. And I found this picture that I had taken not that long ago, actually, on a trampoline, and thought, that's who I am. And it's taken me a lot of years to be comfortable with that. And I think if we can better understand our child's temperament, we can help them to be more comfortable and to see, like we said, to see these things that we might perceive as weaknesses as actually as strengths. Intense people are really fun to be around. There's a lot to all of them. There's a lot of sort of flipping the not the scale, but the perception, I guess, the connotation around. There's great things to being perceptive or persistent. Some people might call that stubborn, but it takes persistence to get the job done, right? So,
When I think of, if I can add to that, um, throughout this whole thing, I could just always come back to my daughter. So not to bring it, not meaning to bring it back to her all the time, but she's actually really good at recognizing this stuff as well. She's 5. But I like what you said there, because although if her emotions take over, and let's say she's sad about something and it just sort of takes over, and it's more of like an anger, frustrated response that just, and it can get loud and it can get heightened. So yeah, that reaction can seem pretty intense, but you also couldn't find a kid who's gonna love as intensely as
Right.
that kid. So yeah, need some support to get through those hard moments. But also you get this other side. I don't even want to put them on like other as they're opposed to each other, but just looking at it like, you get that intensity and there's some challenges in it, but there's some real blessing in it as well.
Exactly. Exactly. The world needs more sensitive people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there. You know, the. I remember a time when I was walking. I don't remember what I was doing exactly, but my daughter had said to me, "Mommy, why you got a mad face?" And I was like, "I don't have a mad face," but I was thinking about something that was stressing me at the time. They're very aware of people's emotions and very empathetic. And if we nurture that in them, so rather than saying, "No, I'm not, I'm fine," I can say things like, "Oh, I actually am. Thank you for noticing." I don't need to tell her the, we don't need to tell our children why or what we're stressing about, but acknowledging that they're right, because we want them to be able to notice that in people and have that um, sensitivity to others, right? So absolutely. And oftentimes these kids who are higher in sensitivity, and children and adults who are higher in sensitivity, and I think it was you who told me this, Brian, they have to go through it. It's like that tunnel, you can't go over it. What's that story? Going on a lion hunt, can't go over it, got to go around it, got to go through it. The emotion.
That's your area.
Sorry, I can't think of it, you have to go through those emotions. You can't skip over them, and it's especially true for these kids that are higher in sensitivity and higher in intensity. And it's this, like, oftentimes too. There's I forgot to mention, a cluster of temperaments. When you're, like I said, when you're asking, is it an easy baby, you're not just asking about one temperament. You're asking about intensity, you're asking about sensitivity, you're asking about regularity, rhythmicity. So if you have a child who has higher in sensitivity, higher in intensity, lower in regularity, and lower in adaptability, that can be a little bit more difficult for parents to manage, as opposed to a child who is higher in adaptability. So, that picture of the ice cream, where was it? So this picture of the ice cream, can you see the girl that's lost her ice cream? That's an intense reaction, right? You can, although I have to say, I think if I lost my ice cream, I would be crying like that too. this this takes a little bit more work as a parent to help this child through this emotion, as opposed to a child who can lay down in the field of flowers after they've lost their ice cream and think, "Oh well, I'll get some another day." Although it's a bad example, because I think anybody who drops their ice cream is probably going to have some tears.
No doubt. Yeah. But I think if I'm hearing you right, it's I often think of like, and I use this example of a broken banana. A kid who's pretty adaptable quite quickly moves to, I still have the same amount of banana, right? But a child who maybe isn't,
Yeah,
a little bit more sensitive, or they're feeling those feelings of they wanted a full banana.
exactly.
You have this reaction that seems like, well, as the adult, you're looking at it differently, thinking like you still have a full banana, right? You put them together, it's going to be the same in your stomach. It makes no difference. You try and rationalize it, but it's feeling those feelings of I wanted a full banana. and now I don't. And
That's right. And if you know that that's your child's temperament, then you can respond with empathy rather than it's fine. You still got the whole banana. Do you know what I mean? If you realize that this really is something that is upsetting, they're not pretending, they're not just doing this to push your buttons, you can respond with empathy and say, I know, I remember how that feels, you know, when I'm sure you've had something in your life that you can respond to. You got to be genuine, because if you're not, by the way, sensitive kids will pick up on that. So you have to, when you're trying to convey that you understand, you have to be genuine, because they'll be able to see that you're not, if you truly are not. Yeah, it's understanding. It really is about understanding. Once we understand that this is the way that we're made, or made up, I guess, or born with these temperaments, then our reaction is different. It's giving parents insight into their child. And then we are able to um, once we're able to see that in our child, we're able to nurture that, then it helps them to become who they're born to be. They're going to, rather than see those things and that may have been maybe and that may still be labeled in their lives as negatives, they're able to see the positive side of it, because we've helped nurture that as they're growing. And the more that they're able to celebrate who they are, the more they can be comfortable in who they are, and that helps build self-esteem and confidence, which is what we want for our kids.
Nice. Thank you.
You're welcome. So if you would like any information on if your child is on either of those scales and you're wanting to help nurture them, please give us a shout. We'll set up a session where you can do an individual session and support you through it.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any chats coming up.
Okay.
But I'll give it. Yeah, so if there's some lingering chats coming on afterwards, we will likely be disconnected and not be able to respond to. That's why I do apologize if we miss your comments. It might be that, you know, as we're at the end of summer and school's winding up, there's not, you know, there's a lot to do, or I've missed something within the technology. I don't think I have, but if I have, so if you're out there and your comments have not been responded to, I completely apologize. I do have the chat up, but I have not, haven't seen any come in. So I do apologize if I've missed some chats along the way.
And if that's the case, please don't hesitate to just pick up the phone and give us a call.
Yeah, I
or
agree.
Email.
Awesome. All right.
Well, thank you, Brian.
Thank you. And are you cool if we're signing off?
All done. Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Kim.
Okay, you're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Am I still on?